It's about the restoration of our republic. We want to educate, encourage, enable the power. We stand for integrity, honesty, self-reliance, self-defense, and most importantly, no compromise on our foundational principles. This is America's Voice Now.
Find America's Voice Now on Facebook and at americasvoicenow.org. Here's Michael Evans.
Good morning, America. You're listening to America's Voice Now. My name is Michael Evans. I'll be your host this morning, and I appreciate you joining with us. If you're catching us live on our website, that's great news. I'm glad to see you out there. If not, I hope you're catching us on Patriot FB or perhaps on constitutionclub.ning.com. You know, we try to make the show available to you in numerous ways. You can also call our listen line and listen to the show at your convenience 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Telephone number for that is 415-325-0725. The idea behind that is that it's radio by telephone. Audio Now is the producer of that, and they provide us with a telephone number that you can call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Catch the show at your leisure, and you can listen to the entire 100 minutes of it anytime you choose. Again, that phone number is 415-325-0725. If you'd like to call in with us this morning, you're certainly welcome to do so. We're testing out our new phone system, and we'd love to hear from you. You can call us at 573-453-5505. And we've been getting our feet wet with this new phone service capability. And if you'd like to participate in the show, by all means, we'd love to have you as we go through our topics this morning. We're going to talk about a couple of different issues this morning, including why Dr. Ben Carson is all wrong on guns and the Second Amendment. Now, I know this is going to generate a lot of mail. And the reason I say that is because Dr. Ben Carson is a favorite of the conservative movement, and he should be, with a problem that I have with him along the lines of guns notwithstanding. In other words, he has a problem with weaponry. He's had it for quite some time. I've talked about it before. He came out the other day on a Sean Hannity radio program, and he talked about his belief on guns. And my concern with that is that he's wrong-headed on this issue. And I don't see any way to resolve that because, quite frankly, the last thing we need is another president who's got a bad attitude about a gun agenda. And, you know, I'll explain to you as we go a little further in why he's wrong on this issue and why he's wrong on the Second Amendment. And I think it's important that you know, because your job as a critical thinker and as a voter and as a citizen and a patriot is to recognize and understand where the candidates stand on the issues and never be taken in again by a candidate who says one thing but is couching his attitudes and mores and opinions in another form. We heard that when in 2008 we kept hearing President Barack Obama say to us, we're going to fundamentally change the United States of America. And no one kind of caught that for what it meant. Well, now we see the results of his fundamental change. And it's unprecedented, to use his wording. In fact, it's beyond that. It's fascist. So we're going to talk about why this issue is important. I'd love to hear your feedback on it. I'm going to read you his and let you hear his actual statement, and then we're going to talk a little bit about it. Our second topic is why gun bans are always lurking around the corner. And if you've been paying attention at all with this issue that went off in California the other day with this young and seriously mentally ill and misguided young man who claimed that because he hadn't had a relationship with a woman in his entire 22 years, it was his duty to wipe women off the face of the planet, and he killed a bunch of other men as well. Clearly, the problem with that kid was not the fact that he had a gun, but the fact that he had a mental problem. And, you know, until we solve the problem of mental illness in this country, which is fostered in large part on society's attitude of it's all about me and the self-aggrandizing and self-important mentality that I can do whatever I want and I can get away with it as long as it benefits me, and hang the cost and, damn the torpedoes, full steam ahead. That whole mentality of I have to have immediate self-gratification for whatever need I have. There's something desperately wrong with that. And our entire society is thinking that way. It's wrong-headed thinking. Combine that with the propaganda we get pumped into our brains by the media every day. Combine that with the fact that half of America is stupefied under mind-altering chemicals, whether they be licit or illicit, and whether they be antidepressants or whether they be something else. And you've got to realize that at this stage in the game, there's nothing that we can do to effectively right the course, if you will. I mean, the ship is under full power. The steering wheel has been chained into place. Our third topic, according to the DHS, you are a domestic terrorist. Why would I say such a thing? Well, according to the DHS, you are. Here's why. If you believe that we are wrong-headed in reference to our attitudes about tax resistance and fighting back against over taxation, an abuse of taxation, if you have ever subscribed to the idea that a militia is not a bad idea, if you are a member of the alternative media, which provides, quote, interpretations of events and issues that differ radically from those presented in mass media outlets, if you're an opponent of open border policies and you're highly critical of the government's response to illegal immigration, if you're a single issue group or an individual or a voter who focuses on a single issue or a cause like animal rights or environmental issues or anti-abortion, if you're a member of the Patriot movement or you're one of those card-carrying constitutionalists, if you're a military vet who's fought in a foreign war, then you are a domestic terrorist, according to the Department of Homeland Security. And ladies and gentlemen, if that's not disturbing, I don't know what might be. That pretty much sums up everyone who is not on board and in the forward march of the current regime. Our fourth topic, how federal unions ensure the lowest common denominator. In other words, we've all heard the joke about why would you want to get in a rocket ship that was built by the lowest bidder? Well, it's the same scenario here. Why would you want to get behind a government that seeks as its common denominator the lowest quality worker it can find, and then forces everyone else who might rise above that mediocrity into it? What do I mean by that? Well, according to a current report that's out right now, and it came out yesterday, the federal agency that is created by the treasonous Dodd-Frank Act is now, it's a consumer watchdog agency, by the way, which what its real job is to track every purchase and banking transaction of every single American. But the so-called Consumer Financial Protection Bureau will no longer rank its employees in a 1 to 5 ranking because, well, it's not fair. It would expose certain people as not qualified to do their job. And so everyone is going to get a gold star, and no one will be ranked on merit anymore. Now, of course, the problem with that is that because of this new ranking system, everyone will be paid in accordance with their rank. Hello. So everybody gets a raise. And like a union, no matter who is the best or the worst employee, everyone gets the same ranking. By the way, it's going to cost taxpayers $5 million in raises. Hello. For an agency that was just created and has no function, not to mention is completely and totally unconstitutional in its origins. All right, let's get into our first topic because this is an important one. We constantly hear the rhetoric about issues surrounding the Second Amendment. And Dr. Carson, who I like very much, by the way, and I certainly don't want to take anything away from him, but he came out the other day and he made a statement when he was on Sean Hannity's show. I want you to hear it because it's important that you understand what he had to say firsthand, and then we're going to address a little bit of it because it's important that you also read between the lines as a critical thinker, okay? So just bear with me for a moment and hear and listen to this. It's only a short, I think it's about 2 minutes.
Hi, Dr. Carson. I'll keep it short and sweet here, but I've heard some conflicting things from people, and I'm curious what your thoughts are on the Second Amendment and what this administration is doing to get it right now.
Well, it's always good to hear it from the horse's mouth. And first of all, I am a very strong believer in the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment is there for a very good reason. And I think our founding fathers were very wise to recognize that the populace could be a tremendous aid to the military. They could form their own militia. There would be a tremendous deterrent for invasion. But the real reason that they put it there is recognizing that there could come a time when our government itself could go off the rail and could try to dominate the people. And the people would need a mechanism of defense for themselves. And I would never allow the Second Amendment to be jeopardized. I do believe that it is necessary for people to begin having rational discussions about things, what kinds of weapons. I don't think tanks, for instance, would be a very good thing to be keeping in your garage. But you certainly should have access to any kind of weapon that you want for recreational purposes or to protect yourself. And there really shouldn't be a lot of restrictions on that. We do need to have a discussion about how we deal with situations where there is a tremendous amount of crime and easy access to the kinds of weapons that can create a lot of damage quickly. But that needs to be done in context of always preserving Second Amendment rights.
Okay. So the important thing here is that when you first listen to this, at first blush, you say to yourself, well, I don't understand what the problem is. That seems to make sense to me. But when you dig down a little bit, you have to keep hitting the buzzer. And here's why. First, what Dr. Carson said is unacceptable. And let me be very clear and blunt. A lot of people in the conservative movement will say, you can't be that harsh about it. Well, I got to quote him. I do believe that it is necessary for people to begin to have rational discussions about things. What kinds of weapons, said Dr. Carson. Wrong answer. You cannot limit the kinds of weapons because the right shall not be infringed. And that means something. The founders intended for the people to be armed equally to the tyrant. And so the idea that you can limit what kind of weapons, and he goes on further to say recreational, I'm sorry. The Second Amendment was never about recreation. And, he gave the right answer in his first blush, but then as he began to get a little deeper into it, he essentially exposed himself. Then he used the standard tactic of the left, and that is to throw out there the obvious, the wild and crazy scenario. Here's what he said. I don't think tanks, for instance, would be a very good thing to be keeping in your garage. But you certainly should have access to any kind of weapon that you want for recreational purposes or to protect yourself. There really shouldn't be a lot of restrictions on that. First of all, you're wrong. The concept that you can limit one kind of weapon is then open to interpretation that you allow, and once you've opened this door wide open, and there's no way that it can only be opened to sliver or partially. Once you've opened this door, Dr. Carson, then you will have all kinds of people who will attempt to get underneath that argument and continue to subvert it and chip away at it. So the problem is that you cast the tank example as the most silly argument that one could find, trying to deflect what you're about to say next. And folks, the use of the word recreational is the problem. There is nothing recreational about weapons necessary to defend against a government gone off the rails, which is using his own words. You see, he's exposing himself, and he's actually causing an inconsistency in his position when he says that, on one hand, the purpose of the Second Amendment is to have a protection defense mechanism against a government gone off the rails. And then saying, but the only thing that you can use to defend yourself is recreational weapons and personal defense weapons. Well, I'm sorry, but against drones, against smart bombs, against these weapons that the military currently has, against the weapons that our government possesses, against surveillance, those are inefficient. He continues to go on to say, you do need to have a discussion about how we deal with situations where there is a tremendous amount of crime and easy access to the kinds of weapons that can create a lot of damage quickly. But that needs to be done in the context of always preserving Second Amendment rights. Stop right there. Let's understand something. You cannot have a conversation where you're saying we're going to adhere to the shall not be infringed portion that focuses on the right, while simultaneously saying that we can limit and infringe upon that right based upon, one, either the tremendous amount of crime, which doesn't really exist, I might add, because if you look at the FBI statistics, crime on a violent aspect has been falling dramatically, precipitously. Secondarily, the kinds of weapons that can create a lot of damage quickly. But bear in mind that this is not a function or a context of the weapon itself. This is a function and a context of the people who are holding the weapon. And the truth of the matter is, because if you're going to sit there and say, we have the right to infringe, well, all right, let me just give you the argument this way. According to this kind of thinking, it's okay to infringe on those who might be unlucky enough to live in an urban environment like Chicago or New York. Because what you're saying is, if you live in an area where there's a lot of crime and there's easy access to the kinds of weapons that can create a lot of damage quickly, we have the right to limit and infringe your right. Don't those people have a right to protect themselves? Or can we strip that right from them simply because, one, they live in an unfortunate area, and two, some bad element may steal or obtain some of those guns and do damage? You see, limits on an uninfringible right are the equivalent of matter and antimatter. The two elements cannot coexist in the same time and spatial plane. Period. End of argument. It is a physics impossibility. You cannot have liberty and tyranny that coexist. You cannot have a limit on a right, which by definition shall not be infringed. You see, he then goes to, and the Second Amendment is quoted in the bottom of the article, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. That quote is an exact argument that derails and invalidates all of his previous points. See, the truth is, I like Dr. Carson very much. But on this issue, he is completely, totally, and utterly wrong. And I would invite an open dialogue, and I would invite an open debate with him on it. In fact, I would love to have this debate. Because, you see, we are now in a time when our nation, politically, is descending and transcending into the same tyranny he's expressing a concern about. Which is, by the way, why he's received national prominence in the first place. Truth of the matter is, if the nation was not descending into tyranny, most people wouldn't have given him a second glance as a potential spokesman for the conservative movement. But here's the problem. You see, we cannot allow the door to be opened and the camel's nose to get under the tent, or any other analogy that you want to use, because once we allow that sliver of this wrong-headed thinking into the dialogue, here's the problem. The intention of people like Dr. Carson may be very good, but they will not operate and or lead in a vacuum. And we know that to be a fact. We've seen it for decades now. Those people who are on the anti-gun side of the fence that would love to have guns banned altogether have been working actively to do exactly that. And they never give in and they never give up a space that they've taken. The other people who are involved in this process will do everything in their power to then subvert, twist, and misinterpret what that limitation means. And that's how we got to the point of tyranny in the very first place. So with all due respect to Dr. Carson, and I respect him in a lot of ways, and I very much agree with him on a lot of issues, he's completely, totally, and utterly wrong on this aspect. I know he has an aversion to weaponry because of his medical training, because of his experience in larger urban communities. But the problem is not the weaponry. The problem is the people. The problem is the society. The problem is the mentality of the people. A gun is an inanimate object. You'll recognize and notice that the young man who committed that atrocity in California first used a knife when he had access to 3 handguns. And he stabbed 3 of his friends, his roommates, to death before he ever got in the car, before he ever put a magazine into the base of that handgun. The problem is not the weapon. It's not the knife. It's not the gun. The problem is the people. The problem is the mentality. All right, we're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk about why gun bans are always lurking around the corner. Because right off the bat, the minute that tragedy in California occurred, the first thing we heard out of the Democrats' mouth was, it's time for a gun ban. And we're going to hit on that issue when we come back. And I'll be more than happy to take your calls on it. You can give us a call at area code 573-453-5505. Before we go, American Resume Service has agreed graciously to support America's Voice Now. And one of the ways they're going to do that is with over 20,000 employed happy clients over the past 25 years, they are doing resumes right. They build resumes and specialize in military resumes, in fact, and they've agreed that they are going to make their $200 resume offer available to any America's Voice Now listener, and they will do that for a half price or 50% off at $100. In addition to that, that $100 will then be donated to America's Voice Now to help keep us on the air. You can reach them by going to AmericanResumeService.com. You can call them at 417-264-2486, and you can email them at info@AmericanResumeService.com. Make sure that you visit our friends over at Battery Station. They're located in West Plains, Missouri, but they have a website you can get to at batterystation.com. You can also call them if you don't find what you want on their website at 417-257-7799. They have hundreds of products that are not on their site, all kinds of things for the self-reliant and self-protecting individual. They've got all kinds of gear that you could benefit from. In addition to that, make sure that you support your local Pizza Hut, but especially the Pizza Hut here in West Plains, Missouri on Porter Wagoner Boulevard. They support our program and actually have gone outside of normal corporate channels to make sure that they advertise on this station with us, and we are grateful and appreciative of that. We're going to take a quick break. When we return, we'll tackle the second topic. You're listening to America's Voice Now. The idea of gun bans has been around for a very long time. And in this case, you know, the gun banners have wasted no time in calling for a new federal ban based on the tragedy that occurred in California. Now, 3 of those individuals that died there were stabbed to death, and they were stabbed before the kid ever even grabbed his weapon and started to go outside and get in his car. there were three additional innocent people who were shot to death, and in addition to that, there were a number that were injured. Now, quite a few of them were injured not by a gun, not by a knife, but by him driving his car into them. I mean, the kid ran over. There was one fellow that he drove into and broke both his legs, and he didn't fire at him. He just hit him with his car. Now, immediately, Richard Blumenthal, the Democrat from Connecticut, jumped right out there on CBS Face the Nation, and the first thing he said was we need to relook at this issue. He said, I really sincerely hope that this tragedy, this unimaginable, unspeakable tragedy, will provide an impetus to bring back measures that would keep guns out of the hands of dangerous people who are severely troubled or deranged like this young man was. All right, stop right there. First and foremost, the kid went through the background checks. Secondarily, he bought the guns legally. Thirdly, he was even interviewed by the sheriff's department 2 days before he went off on this rampage. And he had an extensive history of mental illness and of clinical help that had been provided for him since the kid was 8. He was only 22. I mean, he'd spent more of his life in therapy than out of therapy. He goes on to say that, Blumenthal, that we need mental health resources, and that initiative, I hope, will provide common ground, a point of consensus that will bring us together in the Congress and enable the majority. 90% of the American people want background checks to be heard. All right, stop right there. The truth of the matter is that's an absolute bald-faced lie, and I'm getting tired of hearing it. 90% of Americans cannot agree on what they had for breakfast, not even what they're going to have tomorrow morning. They can't even agree on what they actually had today. This nonsense and this argument about constantly throwing out these examples of how 90% this, 97% of that, it's the same crap we hear about on global warming. 90% of scientists agree. That's a lie. 90% of scientists can't agree on how to spell scientist. It's all lies. You see, well, all right. The point is simply this. This is not a function and a concern or a question about whether or not this kid should have been barred from owning a gun. Nobody agrees that he should have had access to one. Clearly, the kid had mental disease. He had a mental problem. The problem is not the fact that he had the mental problem or the guns. The problem is that when the two come together. And to be honest with you, the fact that the cues were missed is not a reason to turn around and say, but we're going to then strip everyone else of their ability and their right to be able to own and possess a firearm. The host of this program looked at Blumenthal and he said, the sheriff, quote, this is the host of the program now, the sheriff told us that there were no flags that would have prompted a check on the legally purchased weapons that Elliot Rodger had. And he didn't seem to have large or larger than normal size magazines for his weapons. Do you believe legislation in the Senate, or legislation that the Senate did not pass, would have made any difference in this case? Now, before we tell you what Blumenthal's answer was, let's recognize that because he lived in California, he's already limited to 10 rounds per magazine. And so that ought to tell you right off the bat that this argument that you can ban the total number of rounds in a magazine is of any value whatsoever. Because apparently this kid had plenty of extra magazines and he was feeding multiple pistols. Blumenthal answered the legislation had failed and that legislation would have given more resources to law enforcement to have a greater screening for this kind of derangement. Well, that's a lie too. What he said is the legislation that failed to pass support from 55 senators would have provided a mental health initiative with more resources, greater ability for the Santa Barbara police to intervene, to use the sheriff's word, to have professionals trained in diagnosing and detecting this kind of derangement, Obviously, not every kind of gun violence is going to be prevented by laws out of Washington, but at least we can make a start, and I'm going to urge that we bring back those bills, maybe reconfigure them to center on mental health, which is a point where we can agree. You see, here's the problem with that entire statement. One, it makes a presumption that the mental health initiative aspect of the bill, which was an afterthought and a footnote, would actually have some bearing on this particular case, or that it would have a bearing on any other case. Two, it makes the other dangerous presumption that, one, we can take the sheriff's word, or that we should want to trust or take the sheriff's word when we see how the police departments in the nation right now are operating outside of the boundaries of their own law and duty, unwilling to follow the oath they've taken. Third, it makes the presumption that professionals trained in diagnosing and detecting this kind of derangement are actually interested in anything other than an agenda. See, the truth is, that's why they use such vague and incomprehensible language, because all of that sounds kind of nice and rosy on the surface. But that's the same kind of legislative rhetoric that we got in order to get past and get through Obamacare. But now when we see the actual implementation of it, and we understand that Congress never passes anything that has any actual meat to it. All they do is pass the framework. All they do is pass the box. But then somebody fills the box with rules and regulations. And ladies and gentlemen, therein lies the problem. You see, the problem here is that the gun banners are the writers of the rules and regulations to fill the box. Don't forget that most of them come out of Washington. And if they don't come out of Washington on a federal level, they come out on a state level in your state houses. And a good many of these state houses are in ultra-uber-liberal zones where they would just as soon see guns banned. I remind you of the statement from the legislators in New Jersey who said, our goal is confiscate, confiscate, confiscate. Where does that dovetail? Where does that comport with the Constitution in any way, shape, or form? I mean, it's in complete and total diametric opposition to the Constitution in a host of areas, not the least of which is it's the unlawful taking of property. Forget what the property is. You see, the real reason that we have people who are trying to get gun bans, and this goes to the point that I mentioned before about Dr. Carson in the previous segment, is because there is always a list of statists and totalitarians out there who will take the rules that are created and the alleged common sense passage of a piece of legislation to subvert, twist, and misinterpret the intentional goal of that legislation. And then, of course, it's up to us to take it to court and try to win back the right we've given up. And, of course, we're going to court in local areas or in areas where we have absolutely no capability to win because you've got activist judges who are making these determinations, and or you're going there to a Supreme Court, which our founders told us very clearly is not the final arbiter of the law. We know beyond a reasonable and beyond a shadow of a doubt that the intention of the liberal progressive movement is to completely remove from the potential of ownership all guns. Samuel Adams told us that the Constitution shall never be construed to prevent the people of the United States who are peaceable citizens from keeping their own arms. And he didn't preface or suffix that with a statement that says, unless there is a significant percentage of the population that's mentally deranged. Richard Henry Lee said to us, to preserve liberty, it is essential that the whole body of people always possess arms and be taught alike, especially when young, how to use them. Now, with all due respect, if you take a look at this situation that happened out in California, this kid, and I read an article the other day about how he was talking about in his manifesto when he went to a range and he was training himself to do this. He bought a gun. He'd never held a gun before or never had access to one before. And his first gun, he went and he took it to a range so that he could practice. The truth is, had the kid possibly been taught a healthy respect for firearms, he wouldn't have felt so empowered when he suddenly got drunk with the power of one. The people are not to be disarmed of their weapons. They are left in full possession of them. Zachariah Johnson. You see, we know beyond a reasonable doubt that the intention was for us to have unlimited ownership of firearms. How do I know that? I'm going to prove it to you right now. Patrick Henry made a very clear, it's crystal clear after you hear what he had to say. Are we at last brought to such humiliating and debasing degradation that we cannot be trusted with arms for our defense? Where is the difference between having our arms in possession and under our direction and having them under the management of Congress? If our defense be the real object of having those arms, in whose hands can they be trusted with more propriety or equal safety to us, as in our own hands? He made it very clear. If you give Congress the ability to limit your ability to own a firearm, then you have lost it. And the management of Congress is completely unacceptable. Samuel Adams, that the said Constitution shall never be construed to authorize Congress to infringe the just liberty of the press or the rights of conscience, or to prevent the people of the United States who are peaceable citizens from keeping their own arms. You see, they knew we would come to a day like today. They understood that there was a certain element in the nation that would seek to disarm the American people so that they could be enslaved by their own government. They knew it. They spoke extensively about it. And the fact is, gun bans are always lurking around the corner because there are always going to be individuals who will put their statist agenda, and even misguided. Look, a lot of the people that are out there right now that believe the way they believe, I'm sure they actually sincerely believe that. I'm sure that they believe that guns are really the problem. Now, it's a matter of ignorance, the fact that they have refused steadfastly to look at the real evidence behind the problem. Because I got to tell you, before the late 60s, when the Gun Control Act went into play and became law, we didn't have gun shootings like this all over the place, and we had just as many on a pro rata basis of weaponry out there as we have today. We didn't have kids going into schools and shooting each other. Of course, we didn't have kids on antidepressants and ADHD medicine and speed, legal methamphetamine either, did we? We didn't have a society that taught you that there is no consequence and that you are not responsible for your own actions because it's someone else's fault. Guard with jealous attention the public liberty. Suspect everyone who approaches that jewel. Unfortunately, nothing will preserve it but downright force. Wherever you give up that force, you are inevitably ruined. Patrick Henry. See, they knew. Firearms stand next in importance to the Constitution itself. They are the American people's liberty teeth and keystone under independence. From the hour the Pilgrims landed to the present day, events, occurrences, and tendencies prove that to ensure peace, security, and happiness, the rifle and pistol are equally indispensable. The very atmosphere of firearms everywhere restrains evil interference. They deserve a place of honor with all that is good. George Washington. We cannot pretend. We cannot allow anyone to approach that jewel. Because, and I did a show about this going back, I don't know, a couple of weeks ago. The statistic numbers of 262 million dead human beings, all at the hands of governments, far outweigh the number of people that are killed in the United States, or any other country for that matter, as a result of someone with a rogue mental illness. Because, you see, the mental illness that the person who is rogue and goes out there and commits a school shooting or an atrocity like this kid in Isla Vista, that's the same mental illness that the statist has. It's the same pathological mental disease that the tyrant has. Complete and total lack of empathy. Pathological. The only difference is they've got power. What? You thought that the people that ran and that run Somalia and the people who are running Syria, you think the people who are currently running nations in distress under dictatorships, you think those nations are being run by level-headed, well-adjusted, psychologically stable individuals? Do you think Russia is being run under a completely psychiatrically stable Putin? Do you think the United States of America is being run by completely logical, rational, well-reasoned, well-adjusted, mentally stable Congress, White House, courts? Absolutely not. Do you think China is run? You see, here's the point, folks. Totalitarianism is a function of mental illness. Now, they can gather a flock of supporters underneath them who are, for all intents and purposes, those people are pawns to be used in a game. But it doesn't detract from the fact that they themselves have a mental illness that is associated with their continuing expansion of power. It's an addiction. And by the definition of our own enlightened medical community and psychiatric community, addiction is a mental disease and illness. So it's a mental disease and illness unless it involves power? Is that the argument you want to put forth? Because I don't think you're going to carry that one very far. By the time you get to the end of that argument, you will realize your bucket is empty of water. Those who have the command of the arms in a country are masters of the state and have in their power to make what revolution they please. Thus, there is no end to observations on the difference between the measures likely to be pursued by a minister backed by a standing army and those of a court awed by the fear of an armed people. That's an argument that was quoted by John Trenchard. There's an argument showing from Aristotle, actually, that a standing army is inconsistent with a free government and absolutely destructive to the Constitution. James Berg, in Political Disquisitions, an enquiry into public era's defects and abuses in London, he wrote this: "No kingdom can be secured otherwise than by arming the people. The possession of arms is the distinction between a freeman and a slave. He who has nothing and who himself belongs to another must be defended by him whose property he is, and needs no arms. But he who thinks he is his own master and has what he can call his own ought to have arms to defend himself and what he possesses. Else he lives precariously and at discretion, at the discretion of his slave master." The real challenge that we have, America, is that we have forgotten why we cannot allow a gun ban in the first place. Not the fact that gun bans always lurk around the corner, merely the fact that they lurk around the corner because the people who are promoting a gun ban, the people who are promoting your limitation, it doesn't have to be a ban. It just has to be an infringement of your ability. And the reason that they want to limit that is because the designs that they have for you necessarily require you to be unarmed. And the same mental disease that afflicted that young man in Isla Vista is the same mental disease that infects every head of every state. Some just more violent than others. But all of them are infected with the same disease. The disease of ruthless self-promotion. And the disease that they actually don't have. How do I best state this? That their interests trump yours. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to come back and talk about, according to the DHS, you are a domestic terrorist. We're going to read some of their language directly. Make sure that you visit our friends over at batterystation.com. You can get to them on the web at batterystation.com. Make sure that you call them if you don't find what you want on the web. They're the largest purveyor of batteries and electronic gear and flashlights and things like that in the nation, distribute all over the country. You can call them at 417-257-7799. Swing by and visit our friends at Pizza Hut, wherever you may be. But if you happen to be in the West Plains area, make sure that you go to the one on Porter Wagoner Boulevard and tell those folks we appreciate what you've done and support that you've put forth for America's Voice Now. Visit my friends over at Atlas Survival Shelters for the best invariable family-size shelters for any emergency. You can get to their website at atlassurvivalshelters.com, and we'll be building them a brand new site, which should be unveiled fairly shortly, and I'm sure you'll enjoy that. If you have an opportunity, you can go to their Facebook page and like it at facebook.com/Atlas Survival Shelters. We'll be right back.
It's about the restoration of our republic. We want to educate, encourage, enable the power. We stand for integrity, honesty, self-reliance, self-defense, and most importantly, no compromise on our foundational principles. This is America's Voice Now.
Find America's Voice Now on Facebook and at americasvoicenow.org. Here's Michael Evans.
Good morning, America. You're listening to America's Voice Now. If you're joining us live on our website, I appreciate that. I'm glad to see you folks out there. If not, maybe you're listening to us live on Patriot FB. And if you're not listening to us on Patriot FB, perhaps on constitutionclub.ning.com. We have a number of sites that carry our program, and of course, you can always listen to it on our Spreaker feed. We've got a feed that you can download onto your mobile phone, where you can listen to our program there. We also have a listen line, which you can call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and listen to the program. That telephone number is 415-325-0725. It's kind of unique. Audio Now provides it for us, and basically what it is gives you an opportunity to listen to radio by telephone. So if you're driving in the car and you want to hear the program because you've got a long ride ahead of you, you can simply dial 415-325-0725, and you will get a personal playing of the program that was recorded earlier live this morning. So after about 10 o'clock in the morning, it's available, and it'll play until tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock when it gets re-recorded. So anyway, if you have an opportunity to, please make sure that you visit those areas. If you'd like to speak with us this morning, you're certainly welcome to give a call in here and talk a little bit about this DHS terrorism argument that we're going to make. You can call us here at 573-453-5505. That's 573-453-5505. If you have an opportunity to, American Resume Service is backing America's Voice Now, and they are doing so by offering their $200 resume package, and they're going to offer it to anyone from America's Voice Now as a listener who contacts them and says, I'd like to take advantage of that program. The program has two aspects to it. One, it's a $200 resume package, which they're going to offer at a 50% discount to anyone who listens to America's Voice Now. And the second aspect of that is they will then take and donate that whole $100 to AVN for purposes of our expenses and trying to keep this program up on the air. If you are in need of a job or a retune or a freshening of your resume, AmericanResumeService.com is the place to do that. I happen to know the guy who owns the company, and he's done my resume, in fact, and he did an excellent job. You can reach him at 417-264-2486, or you can email him at info@AmericanResumeService.com. So this topic, or this aspect of the program today, and this element, is the DHS. And according to the DHS, you are a domestic terrorist if you believe, and this was just recently uploaded to shtfplan.com. If you don't know what SHTF plan means, that's when the excrement hits the oscillating round paddles and gets thrown against the wall. Right. So here's what the memo says. The DHS, Department of Homeland Security, Office of Intelligence and Analysis on Right-Wing Extremism, quote-unquote, report from March of 2009 with supplementary domestic extremism lexicon classifies individuals as extremists if they identify or are identified with one or more of the following criteria, among many others, each of which is described as violent. Military veterans who have fought in foreign wars and are disgruntled about the takeover of the U.S. See, in and of itself, Just that one thing right there tells us one of the reasons why we've got the problem with the Veterans Administration that we have. You can almost, if one were conspiracy-minded enough, begin to wonder if maybe the premise of the VA helping instead of hurting that population might really ultimately be the goal. If you are an anti-war individual or a member of a group, anti-war, you are a violent domestic extremist. I'm not sure how the correlation of anti-war makes you violent. I'm not sure I understand that, because typically an individual who is anti-war is generally a pacifist. So I'm not quite sure I understand how they can quantify that as violent, but apparently they have seen some light that you and I don't have. If you're a part of a tax resistance movement, quote, groups or individuals who vehemently believe taxes violate their constitutional rights, and that the 16th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, which allowed Congress to levy taxes on income, was not properly ratified. Also, tax protest movement people, tax freedom movement, and the anti-tax movement members, then you are a dangerous, violent, domestic terrorist extremist. If you're a member of a militia, members oppose most federal and state laws, regulations, and authority, particularly firearm laws and regulations, then you are a domestic extremist terrorist who is violent. You don't have to have acted violent. It's just an automatic assumption. Alternative media. Now, this one is pretty broad. If you, whether you participate or a member of, or even just read it or listen to it, which of course means that since you're listening to this broadcast, you are now a domestic terrorist, by the way. Here's your sign. Alternative media, which provide, quote, interpretations of events and issues that differ radically from those presented in mass media outlets. Hello. Critical thinkers are not allowed. If you're a critical thinker and you question what the mass media outlet is presenting to you, and you look for an interpretation of an event or an issue that differs from what that is presented to you in mass media, then you are a dangerous and violent domestic extremist. If you're an opponent of open border policies, defined as, quote, highly critical of the U.S. government's response to illegal immigration, and who oppose government programs that are designed to extend rights to illegal aliens, such as issuing driver's licenses or national identification cards, and providing in-state tuition, medical benefits, or public education, you're a terrorist. You know, that's so far outside the scope of what most people in this country would believe. I mean, I get it that there's a certain left-wing fringe that buys into this nonsense, but show this to the average independent person. Show this to the average person who is on the street and doesn't really pay a whole lot of attention to politics, but let them see it and expose it in this light. If you're a single-issue voter or believer or a member of a group or an individual who focuses on a single issue or a cause, such as animal rights, environmental, or anti-abortion, these group members may be associated with more than one issue. Also, they are called special interest extremists. So if you are a person who goes out there and puts forth an effort to help raise money for the ASPCA. I mean, it is an animal rights group. I mean, we're not talking PETA here. We're just talking about a group that says, hey, you know what? Let's help get these dogs that are in shelters distributed and adopted by local families. Now, they'd be quick to come out and say, no, that's not what we're talking about. Well, that's not what your paper says. And if you're against abortion, you're an extremist. And a violent one at that. It's interesting that a woman the other day on CNBC called pre-aborted babies goo. Goo. Now, I don't know about you, but I wouldn't consider a fetus goo, pre or post. And the idea that if you argue with that point, you are classified as a dangerous, violent extremist, why, I find that unacceptable. If you're a member of the Patriot movement, quote, a term used by right-wing extremists to link their beliefs to those commonly associated with the American Revolution. So, when I read you some quotes that just came earlier from some of our own founders, suddenly that made me a domestic terrorist. DHS has established dozens of fusion centers in cities and states across the country to monitor domestic activity. Local, state, and federal agents from DHS, CIA, and Department of Justice share information concerning the activities of citizens. Activities monitored by fusion centers overlap with those stated in the DHS report lexicon above and further include the following, which tend to vary state to state. Frequent references to the Constitution. Support of third-party candidates. Support for an audit of the Federal Reserve. Opposition to a carbon tax to be paid to a World Bank. Opposition to U.S. submission to the United Nations and or the World Health Organization. The FBI's IntraGuard program. In addition to collecting data internally, FBI agents work within the private sector with business to report on citizens' suspicious activities. Folks, when you think about the arguments that we put forth against the NSA and their extraordinary abuse of the power that government has to monitor and listen to every one of us, I don't understand how you can't recognize the fact that they're misusing that authority. In fact, I posted an argument out here this morning, an article, I should say, two of them, one from the Daily Mail and another one from WikiLeaks, where they exposed the fact that it was another Snowden revelation, that they were monitoring every telephone call in two different countries. And one of them they named, which was the Bahamas. The other one they refused to name, and they were asked specifically by the federal government not to name that country. The reason that they gave was that it could endanger people. Now, the WikiLeaks came out and exposed it and said, no, it's Afghanistan. And they posted an argument that about their reasons why, and it's worthwhile noting. I don't want to read the whole thing to you, but because it's a Julian Assange, it's a declaration or a statement that he wrote the other day. But basically, he states that the NSA has been recording and storing all the domestic and international phone calls of two target countries as of 2013. The Washington Post and The Intercept, which is the new entity that was created by Pierre Omidyar, which is where Greenwald went when he left The Guardian in England. They censored the names of one of the victim states at the request of the United States government. They stated that they had censored the name of the victim country at the request of the U.S. government. WikiLeaks' argument is such censorship strips a nation of its right to self-determination on a matter which affects its entire population. An ongoing crime of mass espionage is being committed against the victim state and its population. By denying an entire population the knowledge of its own victimization, this act of censorship denies each individual in that country the opportunity to seek an effective remedy, whether in international courts or elsewhere. Pre-notification of the perpetrating authorities also permits the erasure of evidence which could be used in a successful criminal prosecution, a civil claim, or other investigations. Now, see, the truth is, I agree with that. I don't believe. Well, first of all, let's take one country at a time. What's troubling about the Bahamas initially is that they are misusing authority under which the DEA has the ability to tap into certain phone systems, but only for the purposes of drug interdiction, which is a whole different argument that shouldn't exist in the first place. But be that as it may, the DEA has agreements in place with the nation of the Bahamas, the Bahamian nation, that says we can have taps into the phone system so that we can get these guys who are smuggling dope. And it's a joint effort between the United States and Bahamas. But to sit there and take a system that the NSA has developed and monitor every telephone call in the entire nation, going well above and beyond the intended and agreed upon use of that tap, in fact, to the point where they're monitoring every telephone call, including the government's own phone calls, unbeknownst to them, without their knowledge and or permission. Ladies and gentlemen, I got to say, that's misusing the authority. That's misusing the agreement. If I said to you, I'm going to give you a key to my house so that when you are coming back from school, you can get in and you can have lunch, and then you can, make your way home, so you got a place to stop off in the event of bad and inclement weather, that's one thing. But if suddenly you begin to use that key to stay overnight and bring your friends over, and every night I notice there's a party in my house, I might well have the right to retract that key, wouldn't I? Because you've abused the principle and the intent of our agreement and my permission. See, the point of this is, here's why I want you to understand why this is so critically important to the discussion of why the DHS says that you're a domestic terrorist. And I'm going to bring the whole thing complete to you now, full circle. First of all, you have to grasp the enormity of what's capable through the NSA systems, that you can record every telephone company for a 30-day period that's made, period. End of argument. Secondarily, we got all the clues and tips we needed from their own statement. And this is from the earlier piece I read. The FBI's InfraGuard program, in addition to collecting data internally, FBI agents work within the private sector with businesses which report on citizens' suspicious activities. The DHS has also established dozens of fusion centers in cities and states across the country to monitor domestic activity. Local, state, and federal agents from DHS, CIA, and DOJ share information concerning the activities of citizens. Well, for starters, they're openly admitting that they violated the law because the CIA has no domestic authority within CONUS. But you see, my point is simply this. If you think that this recording is only happening internationally and that it isn't going on here, you're sadly mistaken. My point to you is simply this. We've reached a point in our history as a nation where for the first time since our creation, since the early initial days of the revolution itself, when our nation has fallen to tyranny. We're in a far worse position than we ever were under King George. The truth is, these capabilities have become the tyranny itself. In any event, to view them in any other light, or any other attempt, I should say, to view them in any other light is self-delusion. The truth of the matter is they admit that they're using these systems to monitor you. And if you have a conversation where the word Constitution comes up, or the word abortion, or any of those other keywords, if you've complained about taxes, if you've ever mentioned the word militia, if you whined and cried about the war, or the fact that your son or your daughter is over there, if you're an opponent of the open border and you've said, this border should be locked down, if you're a military veteran, they're monitoring you. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the hallmarks of totalitarianism. I've been trying to say it for a long time now, and I have not shirked from the right words. Anyone who tries to sugarcoat this or make it sound better or softer or nicer or more gentle is misleading you and themselves. We live in a police state, and the only difference is the Ministry of Propaganda, the mass media outlet, has not informed you officially. And that is the truth. Make sure that you visit our friends at Battery Station. You can get to them by going to batterystation.com. You can also call them at 417-257-7799. Make sure that you see our friends at Pizza Hut. They support our program here, and we're very grateful and appreciative of their efforts. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, they have a reduced lunch menu, and on Tuesday evening, they have kids under 12 that can eat for free. It's family night. Make sure that you have an opportunity and you need a resume to swing over to American Resume Service. You can get to them by calling 417-264-2486, or you can go to info@American Resume Service with an email, or you can just visit their website, American Resume Service. They have over 20,000 employed happy clients over the past 25 years, which tells you they got to be doing something right. They can definitely help and assist you. In addition to that, if you're going to be locally in the area here, I'd love for you to get yourself an opportunity to swing by Wits End Classic Barbershop in the town of West Plains, right on the square. You can get yourself a great haircut over there. Their phone number is 417-372-2027. And for $10, they'll give you a great haircut. And they do that old-style straight razor shave with hot lather and the whole 9 yards. So take your husband or your boyfriend or your significant other down there and get him a great shave and a haircut. We'll be back in just a minute. When we come back, we're going to talk about how federal unions ensure the lowest common denominator. Talking about this issue of the DHS and domestic terrorism and how they're tagged and labeled. I got to tell you, there's an article out there this morning in the Washington Post. It actually came out yesterday, the 27th. And it's called Brokers Use Billions of Data Points to Profile Americans. And what most people don't recognize is that the companies that are doing this are actually taking that data, and in order to profit from it and reimburse themselves for the cost of collecting it, they're selling it. Not only just to other companies. I mean, I get it. There's insurance companies that want to buy that, so they know how to target you. There's, a clothing store that wants to buy it so that they know what demographic to go after and blah, 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 blah. All the normal arguments. But the more insidious, the more dangerous system, the more dangerous entity that's buying this is your federal government itself. They're buying what they're prohibited legally from collecting on you themselves. That is a scary thought. In other words, they're already capturing as much as they think they can get away with. But they supplement those files by buying data from these entities to backfill their files. And they know whether you are a single mom. They know whether you are an American of Italian extract or African American extract, or if you are an individual who has had medical concerns where you've got a bad heart or you've got a bad liver problem. They know if you've had a drug problem or an alcohol problem in your past. They know whether or not you shop online or whether you shop locally. They know what kind of food you eat. They know what kind of services you use. They know whether or not you have internet. They know whether or not you use the internet to just watch a movie from time to time on Netflix, or whether or not you're out there looking at those subversive alternative media websites that make you a violent extremist. They know whether you speak more than one language. They know whether or not you have a pet and how you feel about that. They know whether or not you're running a small business out of your home. Maybe one that you're not paying taxes on. See, they're data brokers, and they gather all this information. And with the information that they're gathering, they have an opportunity to what? Identify and profile you. Now, those profiles, of course, come with a problem because they tell a lot of information about you. They draw a picture of you that is so exacting that, quite frankly, there's not a whole lot left to the imagination. One of the statements in the article says, with potentially thousands of fields, data broker segment consumers into dozens of categories, such as Bible lifestyle, affluent baby boomer, biker, Hell's Angel. In one category called rural everlasting, it describes older people with low educational attainment and low net worth. Wouldn't it be nice to be on that list? So, if you are in the rural everlasting category, you are a low educational attainment person with a low net worth. Then there's another one that would be equally uncomfortable to be on, the urban scramble. And that list includes concentrations of Latinos and African Americans with low income. Here's the problem. Most Americans wouldn't like the idea that that is being tracked. But what makes it very scary is that it's not only sold to marketers, it's sold to government themselves. And they're supplementing that which they are developing on you, including through whom? Boom shakalaka. The brand new consumer watchdog agency. It was created under the Dodd-Frank Act of Treason. That was the thing that was passed in 2010 to monitor the financial industry. Yeah, right. It's a alleged consumer watchdog agency. And, well, they're really anything but a watchdog agency. What they really are is a tracking entity. And they track your purchases and they track your banking transactions. And with this information, they're supposed to be, protecting you and looking out for your best interest, but of course that's a secondary issue. They are monitoring every transaction in your bank, every check you write, every ATM card swipe you give, every credit card purchase, where you travel, what you shop at, what you buy, when you're there, where you go, what you subscribe to. And they've had a problem of late. The problem is that they have, well, first of all, they're new. They were only created in 2010, so they're only 4 years old, which is, as federal government agencies go, you know, that's an infant, right? So they were designed to be a consumer watchdog, and they're scrapping their system of employee ratings now because they have concerns. They've been trying to figure out how to rate their employees, which, by the way, you know, private companies or private industry have been doing for, I don't know, since time immemorial. It's fairly easy. You have a supervisor who goes out and reviews the people who are under him and provides some sort of a merit-based response or report as to how that individual has been performing in their job duties. Now, the problem that the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau has is that they don't want their employee ratings to be discriminatory. Now, the discriminatory part comes in when one person is made to look better than another. Not because of race or religion or sex or, you know, creed or color or any of that other nonsense. Because one person does their job more efficiently or better than another one. The rating system that they use now scores a rank between 1 and 5. And because of their concerns with the discrimination within the system, everyone who scores a 3 or above, regardless of what your performance is, will now be getting the top rating of 5. Oh, by the way, that comes with the corresponding retroactive, we're going to go back into the past, pay raise. Only government could construe this as an appropriate and legitimate use of its authority and power. This is slated to cost the taxpayers $5 million just to cover the retroactive pay raises, which is a mere, you know, bag of shells to these traitors and communists and statists and elitists. But what's really disturbing about this is that government is all like this. Nobody can have a merit. It's like this concept that we just heard about with the school, where the school sent home a note to parents saying that they were going to cancel the honor roll program at the school, where they were going to honor the honor roll children who had done exceptionally well, because other kids who didn't make the honor roll might feel bad. And how they wanted to cancel field day in another school. Because field day, some kids can't jump as high as other kids. And some kids can't run as fast as other kids. And they don't want anyone to feel left out. So everyone at field day was supposed to not try. If you can run faster than the other kids, and you know it, and you would know it because, you know, out on the playground, you've been doing it for years. And Cindy knows that she's the fastest runner. But she's told, Cindy, now when you run, we don't want you to actually win. We want you to make sure that you look over your shoulder, and if there's anybody who's still behind you, just kind of let them catch up. Essentially, the federal government is saying that there is no good employee and bad employee. There are only employees. And all employees are equally good. Now, we know that this has been a program and a practice in place for years. How do we know that? Well, you cannot get fired from the VA, even though you have criminal guilt associated with the fact that you have been playing with veterans and people's lives. They cannot fire those people. They can't fire them. Did you hear what I just said? They can't fire them because it takes over a year to be fired from a government job because they have a union. And the union says, nobody's ever wrong. Can't fire them. Now, we know that Louisiana VA staff falsified documents. Falsified documents. That's fraud. If you did that at work, you'd be fired. If not charged criminally, assuming that it cost the company something. So here's the question. See, this eliminates the principle and the concept that we might ever see perp walks out of something like this, or the IRS, or the Benghazi scandal, or the other scandal with the IRS itself, or the other scandal with Fast and Furious. Why no perp walks? You don't need a multi-year investigation to ascertain that an individual should be arrested and charged with criminal behavior. They don't wait for that perp walk for you. The entire Veterans Administration staff should be relieved, eliminated, replaced. And until then, every vet should be able to use his veteran's ID card to walk in and get services at a local hospital. See, that's an actual and executive order that everybody in America would probably agree with. Not like the other kinds of executive orders that we've been getting. But you see, the problem is that everything is upside down. There's retroactive payments that are going to go out to this group at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which is called an independent agency, by the way. And there is no such thing. How can you make a statement like that? Independent agency. Independent of what? So anyone who got a rating of 3. So, look, here's the analogy. When you're in school, you can get an A, you can get a B. You can get a C, you can get a D, and you can get an F. Now, everybody knows that A and B would be an exceptional ranking, and you've done well. C says this is an average ranking, and that with this ranking of average, you're passing, but that's about the limit of what you've got going for you. You're just average. D says you're not living up to your potential, or you're just not cutting it because this is a subject you just can't grasp and gain control over, and so either you got to work harder to pull it up or you got to go. And F says, you completely and utterly failed. What they're saying here is that anyone with a C rating or higher gets paid as if they got an A+. Now, what about the people who actually did get an A+? What about the people who got a B? Isn't that unfair to them that they got an A and a B, and that the guy who got a C is receiving the same accolades for being on the honor roll as them? Linda Swindling, the author of Stop Complainers and Energy Drainers, How to Negotiate Work Drama to Get More Done, she says to give an across-the-board raise slaps the face of the people who actually deserve it. The original article was found at the American Banker. They're the ones who originally uncovered this. And they found that minority employees were likely to receive lower evaluations than their white counterparts. Here we go with the white privilege crap again. A 2013 internal agency report found 74.6% of white employees received ratings of 4 or 5, compared with 65.2% of Hispanics and 57.6% of black employees. So, in order to eliminate the drama and the potential for discrimination, we're just going to give everybody an A. Well, first of all, I'd like to know who actually did that study. In other words, at American Banker, they found that these minority employees were likely to receive lower valuations, right? Were they white or were they black or were they Hispanic people who did the study? I want to know their party affiliation. I want to know where they came from. I want to know how they view this. I want to know if the word white privilege has ever crossed their lip. The problem that we have is that the entire nation has descended into anarchy. Social, mental, logical, reason, anarchy. And the chaos is intentional. They are using people as pawns to create a level of chaos. The purpose of it is distraction. The purpose of it is to make sure that everyone's off balance. Everyone is disoriented. No one can feel confident or get a grasp on what's happening. Think of it like this. When the police kick in your door on a SWAT team, one of the first things they do is they lob in a flashbang because it goes bang and it's a high concussion, which shakes you. It deafens you, and because of the concussion, it physically rocks your body. And it blinds you. So now, and of course, you're sitting there in a room, right, and here comes this thing, and you hear a clunk, and it rolls across the floor, or skitters across the floor, and all eyes are drawn to it, because it's the moving object in the room. Boom, it goes off. You're now blinded, you're deafened, and your body is traumatized from the concussion. And so while you're disoriented and off balance and just trying to figure out what's going on, here come all of these guys in black uniforms. Hut, 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 hut. Everybody down on the floor. Blah, 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 blah. The same analogy is happening, but it's happening on a nationwide basis. And it's happening right now in our country as we speak. It's a slow motion version of a SWAT raid. Everyone in the room is completely and totally disoriented. We've been flashbanged into a level of disorientation and chaos. And out of the chaos will come the order of tyranny. The order of tyranny. Because with tyranny is order. There is order in tyranny. Ask any nation, or the victim of any nation, that has committed genocide. There is order in how they accomplish the task. Ask any slave how it's accomplished. Well, it's accomplished by having order. There is order when repression is the daily grind. Everyone just does what they're told or fears losing their life or their freedom. But our federal government operates on this lowest common denominator principle because they're all in training. They're all in training. This is political correctness run amok. And it's not limited just to the CFPB. It's a slap in the face to everybody in the country who was operating under the premise that hard work and motivation and drive and focus would actually carry the day for you. That there was something at the end of all of that that you earned, that there was a reason behind it, and that because of that hard work, because of that motivation, you would personally benefit. The goal is to seek and sow the seeds of chaos. And given the collapse of our society as we know it, the inevitable conclusion to that is what? A phoenix must rise from the ashes. The question is, will the phoenix be liberty or tyranny? And I guarantee you that the statists and those amongst us who thrive and survive and live their lives based on Bernays' concept that if you're an elitist, you actually know better. And that the rest of those peasants should just follow my lead. If they only knew what was good for them, they wouldn't question, because I know what's best for them. That is the future, ladies and gentlemen, and that is the future of America. If you have not drawn the conclusion that the premise behind what's happening here is your total and abject enslavement, then I quite cannot understand for the life of me why you're listening to this program. Apparently, not enough of you do. There are 315 million Americans in this country, give or take a few in either direction. And out of that 315 million, there are about 1 million, roughly, that are your overlords. There are probably another 5 or 8 million, maybe as high as 10, that they are the kind of the cruel overseer operating under the direction of the plantation owner, so to speak. And their goal is your complete and total and abject subjugation to debt, to their orders, to their rules of law, which are not meant for anyone to follow other than you. These people don't follow law, as we now know. I mean, you couldn't get away with it. If you did this in a company, you'd be sued. And people would be screaming, courts, solve this problem. This is unfair. Ladies and gentlemen, the center cannot hold indefinitely. And the question is, are you prepared, one, to defend and protect yourself and your own immediate family? And then secondarily, are you following the course of leadership? Are you living up to the responsibility that you have to be a leader? If you're not, then you need to have a serious conversation with the mirror. Because each of you is in a position to lead. Someone, somehow, somewhere. Small or great, big or little, we're all in a position to lead. The question is, are you going to lead others? You're going to educate those around you and raise their awareness, or fall asleep? You've been listening to America's Voice Now. You can communicate with me direct by Mike at America's Voice Now. It's Mike at americasvoicenow.org. See you tomorrow.